For me, Jeffers and the Metric Fallacy was probably the most important essay that I'd ever read, at least up until that point. Can you talk about some of your ideas there?
Yeah, and that also has gotten a lot of email, not on the scale of the JFK essay, because obviously there are a lot more people familiar with the Zapruder film and the JFK conspiracy ideas than there are Robinson Jeffers poetry or poetry meter. But within poetry, that probably has gotten, if not the most, probably it's in the top three or four. Um, and it's one of the earliest. It might be the very first essay. I think it's a seek and destroy essay, possibly, which is a series I had done, but uh, I haven't written anything in there because I haven't written poetry for almost a decade now, a little over a decade now. But basically, it talks about the fallacy of poetic meter. You know, iambic pentameter, on off, on off, on off, on off sounds. You know, people don't talk like in iambic pentameter. It's ridiculous, and it's a fallacy that really came about because of the popularity of Shakespeare, and it's one of the reasons too that a lot of people are turned off by poetry. It's a lot of the reason that people are turned off to Shakespeare and to a lot of things written supposedly in meter because there's a because people can hear when they hear Shakespearean actors exhorting themselves like that. There's a fallacy, there's a falseness to the way those characters speak that distances people from art. And it's an obvious thing. I used the example of the first word that came to my mind, generations, which maybe I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation or whatnot when I came up with the idea. Uh, but if you say the word generations, 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 there are clearly four distinct stress levels. Uh, generations. Ray is the most stressed. Generations, generations. Gen is the second most stressed. Shuns is the third most stressed, and is the fourth. So you have uh, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3. The moment that you have and admit that there's a third level of stress, meter is dead. The idea of classical meter is dead. And if you actually were to diacritically mark off stresses rather than stress, non-stress, stress, non-stress, this binary, black and white, dualistic thought, and think about the way and read a paragraph normally. If you were to, have one of those meters that looks like a heart monitor about, on the stress level that's in sound or voice, you would clearly be able to demarcate and say any 100 syllables that someone speaks randomly, just talking randomly, probably a minimum of 10 to 12 stress levels, at a maximum, maybe 2 or 3 dozen stress levels. If someone's especially agitated, yeah, even so. So music doesn't come from this binary idea of stress, non-stress, stress, stress, non-stress, stress, stress, non-stress. Music comes from the ways that the stresses play out. So if, let's say, I have a 10 or 11 syllable line in poetry, the music will be like that. It'll go up and down like waves, and those waves won't be exact, but they may be, a little bit with a hump here or there. But that doesn't in and of itself make good music. If you have 8 lines, say, that have nice gently rolling waves, that might make for good music if you're talking about a love poem or a poem about looking at a baby in a crib. But if you're talking a poem where the character or the speaker of the poem is stressed, talking about being in war, um, some of the famous World War I poets, if you were to really diacritically mark some of those poems, they have great music, but they are not metric by any sense of the word. What you might have is someone with very jagged lines where the stress levels go up and down, or you get a lot of rat-a-tat-tat, these hard sounds that come naturally or seemingly naturally in a lot of these poems that are talking about stressful moments. I know when I write, whether it's poems or prose, that comes naturally to me. Some people have to affect it in the best sense of the word to get it into their work. But that's what music is. The music is appropriate to the emotional resonance of the poem. It's not in this binary, dualistic, yes, no, white, black, white, black kind of thinking. It just doesn't work like that. People don't normally talk like that. They did not talk like that in the times of the Greeks or the Romans. They did not talk like that in the time of Shakespeare, and they don't talk like that now, and they will never talk like that. Some people think that people came up with the idea of meter because of the heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. I don't know where it arose, but it's certainly a fallacy. And this essay, uh, you know, I know there are people on blogs. There's at least over the years I found at least a dozen blog entries where people have referenced this essay. Most of them, you know, believe that there is meter, and yet they can't argue against what I'm saying in their pieces. It's kind of ridiculous how silly it is, um, but that's the basic gist of the essay. It's in a sense, I think, an essay that years from now, when my work is out there and I'm known and possibly dead, it's going to be seen as probably one of the most important, if not the single most important essay on poetry ever written. It's one of those things that will be, I think, a bottleneck moment in the history of poetry. So that's basically that essay.